Do you believe that the only way to overcome fear is by confronting it head-on? If so, it's time to question everything you've been told. This widely accepted idea that fear must be conquered through brute force is not only flawed, but might be the very reason you've been feeling stuck for so long. Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century, shared a radically different perspective, one that has the power to change everything. According to Jung, fear is not something that should be defeated or vanquished. Instead, it must be understood. And here lies the greatest misunderstanding. As long as you keep trying to beat fear using the wrong approach, it will continue to dominate you from the shadows. But there's something no one has probably told you before. Within your fear lies the hidden key to your deepest freedom. It's not about bravery. It's not about strength. What you need is something far more profound: awareness. So if you think you already know how to handle fear, pause for a moment and think again. Because in the next few minutes, you'll uncover why almost everything you thought you knew about fear is incomplete or even completely wrong. And more importantly, how a simple shift in perception could change the way you experience life forever. Let's start with a question. What is the fear that challenges you the most right now? Think about it, reflect, and if you're ready, share it in the comments. That act of sharing, of expressing it outwardly, is often the very first step toward real understanding and transformation. Fear isn't just an emotion. It's a message, a signal that there's something essential within us we've been avoiding. Every time we run away from fear, every time we pretend it's not there, we're actually rejecting a part of ourselves. Carl Jung didn't see fear as an enemy. He saw it as a messenger from the unconscious mind, carrying truths that are often difficult to face but impossible to ignore forever. How many times have you heard the phrase, "face your fears," or "just push through it"? Society conditions us to believe that fear is an obstacle to be overcome, that courage alone can make it vanish. But ask yourself honestly, how well has that worked? How many times has fear returned, perhaps stronger than before, even after you thought you had conquered it? Jung offers a different path, one that is more demanding, but also more transformative. He believed that fear is not a wall to break through. It's a signpost. It points to the parts of our psyche that are asking, sometimes desperately, to be seen. These are parts we've buried, rejected, or hidden away. Sometimes they're dark, painful, or shameful. But Jung taught that these elements are also the seeds of our wholeness, if we're willing to engage with them. This is where the real paradox lies. Fear often protects us from confronting the very aspects of ourselves that we need to integrate in order to grow. It acts like a guardian, standing at the gates of our inner shadow, the side of the self where we hide everything we've labeled as unacceptable, weak, embarrassing, or unworthy. Yet only by turning toward that shadow can we become whole. Jung called this process individuation. Individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming the truest version of yourself. It requires not the suppression of fear, but its exploration. Not running from the dark, but walking through it with awareness. The purpose isn't to destroy what frightens you, but to understand what it reveals. Fear for Jung was not just an inconvenient feeling. It was a compass. It appeared when we strayed from our path, when we disconnected from our essence. Instead of being an obstacle, it was a guide, one that, if listened to, could lead us back to authenticity. And this is precisely why the modern mindset fails us. We've been trained to see fear as something purely negative. We're told to avoid it, distract ourselves from it, or crush it with willpower. But this approach fails time and time again. Why? Because it never addresses what fear truly is, a profound signal from the unconscious, asking for your attention, your presence, and your compassion. Take anxiety, for example. Today, we treat anxiety as a symptom to be eliminated. We medicate it, suppress it, distract ourselves from it. But Jung would invite us to ask, what is this anxiety trying to show me? What am I not willing to face? What deeper truth lies beneath this unease? The same applies to phobias, irrational fears, or that persistent, undefinable discomfort that seems to follow us through life. These feelings are not random. They're not failures. They are reflections of an inner landscape that's asking to be explored. And here's something even more fascinating. Fear is not only a personal experience, it's also collective. Jung introduced the concept of the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of knowledge, memories, and archetypes that belong to all humanity. According to this view, your personal fears often mirror deeper, universal fears, patterns that exist across all cultures and all of history. For instance, the fear of death is not yours alone. It is woven into the human condition. It reflects one of the most ancient and powerful archetypes we carry, the awareness of our finiteness. Likewise, the fear of rejection or abandonment can often be traced to the maternal archetype, which represents our primal longing for safety, nurture, and belonging. Understanding that your fears are not just your own, but are shared by billions across time and space, can bring a deep sense of connection. Your fear is not a flaw, it is a mirror of what it means to be human. And recognizing that can help you approach your fears not with judgment, but with curiosity and compassion. To begin understanding fear from Jung's perspective, we must first understand the structure of the human psyche as he described it. Jung didn't see the mind as a single unit. He described it as a complex system of conscious and unconscious parts, each playing a vital role. The ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, the self, the collective unconscious, these are all elements within you, influencing your behavior, your emotions, and yes, your fears. When fear arises, it is often the unconscious calling out to be acknowledged. It could be an unresolved wound from childhood, a repressed memory, a neglected part of your identity. It could even be something you inherited through generations, passed down silently, but still alive within you. That's why simply confronting fear as if it were an enemy to defeat doesn't work. You can't conquer what you haven't yet understood. You can't silence what you refuse to hear. Jung teaches us that real freedom comes not from overpowering fear, but from decoding its message. Carl Jung divided the human mind into three main components: the conscious, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. Fear, he explained, often seeps into all of these layers, manifesting in forms that range from clearly visible to deeply hidden and obscure. On the conscious level, fear tends to be straightforward and recognizable. It is the fear of failing an important presentation, the fear of physical harm, or the fear of losing someone we love. These fears seem simple because they are tied to specific, tangible situations. However, Jung believed that conscious fear often acts merely as the tip of the iceberg. It is a visible symptom of far deeper issues buried in the unconscious. For example, a person might believe they are simply afraid of public speaking, but that fear might not come from the act of speaking itself. It might be rooted in an earlier experience of humiliation, rejection, or ridicule that now lies dormant in the personal unconscious. According to Jung, the personal unconscious is the reservoir of all that we have repressed or forgotten. It is here that painful memories, traumas, and parts of ourselves we consider unacceptable reside. Fear frequently emerges as a defense mechanism, a kind of psychological guardian that rises to protect these sensitive contents. Jung described a particular element of the unconscious called the shadow. The shadow is where all the qualities we deny, reject, or fail to integrate into our conscious identity are stored. It is here that fear often finds its most powerful source. Consider someone who constantly tries to appear strong and confident. Such a person may harbor an overwhelming fear of vulnerability. But this fear is not merely about vulnerability itself. It represents something deeper. It points to a disowned part of the self, a fragment buried within the shadow that the individual cannot face or accept. And the more we deny these darker aspects of ourselves, the more intensely fear tends to grow. It becomes louder and more persistent, almost as if trying to warn us that we are becoming disconnected from essential parts of who we really are. Yet, as Jung observed, most people tend to ignore these internal warnings. They prefer quick fixes, temporary distractions, or external solutions that do not truly address the root of the problem. Beyond the personal unconscious, Jung also proposed the idea of the collective unconscious, a deeper, universal layer of the psyche. In this realm lie archetypes, symbolic patterns of behavior and experience shared across all cultures and historical periods. Many of these archetypes are closely linked to fear. Take, for instance, the archetype of the hero. The hero represents courage and triumph, but the hero's journey is always marked by encounters with the unknown and with terror. The hero must face monsters, descend into the underworld, and confront inner demons before emerging transformed. These monsters are not literal. They are symbolic representations of the universal fears that all humans must grapple with at some point in their lives. Another central archetype is the shadow itself. The shadow doesn't just represent the repressed material within an individual. It also symbolizes what is collectively denied or hidden by societies. The fear of the shadow is universal because it embodies both our hidden potential and our deepest inner conflicts. To face the shadow is to confront what makes us most uncomfortable, what we are most unwilling to admit. And yet Jung believed this confrontation was essential. He argued that the ultimate purpose of life is individuation, the process of integrating every part of our psyche to become a truly whole and authentic person. Fear, according to Jung, is an unavoidable part of this journey. It shows up as a signal, a whisper from the soul, telling us that we are approaching something important, something that might be painful or challenging, but also necessary for our growth. Consider the case of someone who constantly feels afraid to change careers, even though they are deeply unhappy in their current profession. That fear might not only stem from rational concerns like financial insecurity or the fear of the unknown. It could also reflect a deeper inner conflict, a tug-of-war between the longing for stability and the desire for personal fulfillment. The fear is not the enemy. In Jung's view, it is a messenger. He likened facing fear to entering a dark cave. At first, the darkness is terrifying. But once we step inside, we may discover hidden treasures, insights, strengths, and truths about ourselves that were previously inaccessible. One of Jung's most profound ideas was that fear often arrives as a sign that transformation is near. It appears when we are ready to evolve, but still resistant to change. Take the example of a midlife crisis, something Jung studied in great depth. At a certain stage of life, many people begin to feel an overwhelming and unsettling fear. It is the fear of aging, the fear of losing relevance, or the fear of having lived without fulfilling one's true potential. This type of fear cannot and should not be dismissed. In fact, Jung's approach becomes most powerful precisely in these moments. He taught that we should not run from such discomfort, but dive into it. In this context, fear is not an obstacle to be removed. It is a gateway. It is an invitation to go inward and explore the territories we have long avoided. But modern culture often offers a different message. Today's world is obsessed with eliminating fear as quickly and painlessly as possible. Countless books, motivational speeches, and self-help gurus promise to help us conquer fear in 5 easy steps or banish anxiety forever. But Jung's philosophy invites us to ask a much deeper question. What if fear is not a problem to solve, but a teacher to listen to? Fear may be the most honest emotion we have. It tells us where we are wounded, where we are stuck, and where we need to grow. It reveals the parts of our psyche that are fragmented or hidden. And if we dare to follow it, not as victims, but as curious explorers, it can guide us to the very core of who we are. In doing so, fear becomes sacred. It becomes the threshold we must cross to discover our wholeness, to embrace our contradictions, and to step fully into the mystery of being human. For Jung, these superficial approaches to fear are ultimately ineffective. Fear doesn't simply vanish because we choose to ignore it, nor does it disappear when we try to suppress it with quick-fix techniques. Instead, what happens is that fear finds new ways to express itself. It becomes anxiety, emotional stagnation, or even manifests through physical symptoms. The only path to genuine transformation begins when we give ourselves permission to explore the true source of our fear. This is not easy. It demands courage. But more than that, it requires patience and a deep sense of self-compassion. Jung believed that fear is directly linked to freedom, not because we need to conquer it in order to be free, but because true freedom comes when we understand what lies behind our fears. When we confront them head-on, we uncover hidden truths about ourselves, truths that had remained buried beneath the surface. These revelations liberate us from automatic behaviors and thought patterns. They allow us to make more conscious decisions and to live a life that is aligned with our most authentic self. Now that we've explored the profound nature of Jung's perspective on fear, it's time to bring these ideas down to earth, into our everyday lives. After all, theory only becomes meaningful when it is lived. So, let's turn to real-life examples, stories that illustrate how fear operates in our lives in subtle yet powerful ways. Take the case of Mariana. She was a highly successful professional. She had everything that most people dream of: a stable career, public recognition, and an admirable social circle. But every time she was asked to take on new challenges, like leading an important project or speaking in public, she would be seized by a paralyzing fear. She explained it away by saying that she simply didn't like being the center of attention. But during a Jungian therapy session, a deeper truth began to surface. Mariana's fear wasn't truly about external attention. It was about the fear of being seen as imperfect. From a young age, she had learned that making mistakes was unacceptable. Every failure brought her shame, and she worked hard to never repeat them. But the part of her psyche, filled with insecurity and doubt, didn't disappear. It was merely repressed. As an adult, her shadow took the shape of a deep fear of situations that might expose her flaws. When Mariana finally began to explore this hidden part of herself, she came to understand that her obsessive pursuit of perfection was limiting her life. She realized that fear, rather than something to eliminate, was actually an invitation to accept her own humanity, flaws and all. And that realization was deeply liberating. Now consider Raphael, a talented artist who spent years without creating anything new. He told himself that he just wasn't inspired, but deep down, he knew that the real issue was his fear of being judged. When Raphael explored this block through Jung's framework, he uncovered something profound. He wasn't actually afraid of what others thought of his art. What terrified him was his own inner critic. He had projected his own harsh judgments onto the world around him. Within his shadow, there was a critical voice constantly whispering that he would never be good enough. Raphael's fear wasn't about others, it was about himself. He realized that to move forward, he had to face and integrate this hidden part of his psyche. Once he did, he began to create again, not for approval, but as an act of personal truth and expression. Jung often used symbolic imagery to describe the process of confronting fear. One of his most powerful metaphors is that of the dark cave. Fear is like a shadowy, intimidating entrance we avoid. Yet, within that cave lies the treasure we are seeking. This image reminds us that fear isn't just a barrier. It's a signal, a sign that something meaningful is hidden beneath. For Mariana, the treasure was self-acceptance, learning to embrace her imperfections. For Raphael, it was the freedom to create without fear of judgment. Fear, as we see, is not only a personal challenge, but also plays a central role in our relationships with others. Think of the fear of abandonment, one of the deepest and most common emotional wounds. It can drive someone to avoid emotional connection entirely, guarding themselves against potential rejection. Or it can lead to controlling behaviors, desperate to prevent the other person from leaving. Jung would see this as the manifestation of the archetype of the wounded lover. This archetype represents not just the longing for love and connection, but also the emotional scars left by past experiences. In this light, the fear of abandonment is not just a relational issue. It's a mirror reflecting unresolved wounds. And when someone has the courage to face this fear and dig into its origins, they often discover patterns of behavior and core beliefs that have kept them stuck. What once seemed like a problem in a relationship turns out to be a profound opportunity for personal healing. So how do we begin to work with fear in our everyday lives? It starts with awareness. We must learn to identify fear and bring the theory into practice. Ask your fear questions. When you feel fear, instead of reacting automatically, pause and ask, what is this fear trying to tell me? This simple question can open the door to deep insight. Observe repeating patterns. What kinds of situations tend to trigger fear in you? These patterns usually point to areas of life you're avoiding. Write about your fears. Putting your fears into words, writing down what you feel and why you think you feel it, can be a powerful way to access parts of the unconscious mind. Reflect on your shadow. Ask yourself, what aspects of myself do I reject or avoid? Fear is often connected to these exiled parts of the self. As we've seen through the examples of Mariana and Raphael, fear, though uncomfortable, also carries the potential for liberation. They only found freedom once they stopped running and turned to face what they had avoided for so long. This path, though difficult, is what Jung referred to as the hero's journey. The collective unconscious, as defined by Jung, is the deepest layer of the human psyche. It's a repository of experiences accumulated by humanity over countless generations. It contains the archetypes, universal patterns that represent the core aspects of existence. Fear, in this context, is not just a fleeting emotion. It is an echo of these archetypal forces. For instance, fear of the unknown is a theme that appears in every culture. It surfaces in myths of monsters, uncharted lands, and epic journeys. This fear corresponds to what Jung called the collective shadow, all that is unknown and unintegrated, both individually and socially. He believed that archetypal fears are embedded in our psyche because they reflect existential challenges shared by all human beings: fear of death, fear of failure, fear of rejection. These fears are universal, and yet deeply personal. Among the archetypes most closely tied to fear, we find the hero and the dragon. The hero archetype represents the individual who must face fear, symbolized by the dragon. This confrontation isn't just about slaying a beast, it's about integrating parts of the self that have been hidden or denied. The shadow, as discussed earlier, is the archetype that holds everything we repress. Fear of the shadow is the fear of facing our own limitations, flaws, and untapped potential. The wise old man is the archetype of guidance and understanding, but he demands that we face difficult truths. His fear is the fear of reality itself, stripped of illusion. Then there's the terrible father archetype, representing oppressive authority and judgment. Fear of this figure can appear as fear of failure or the sense of never being good enough. Just as archetypes shape our individual psychology, they also influence entire societies. In times of crisis, like war, pandemics, or social upheaval, archetypal fears rise to the surface. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, we saw global expressions of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of illness, fear of change. These weren't just rational responses. They were also symbolic reflections of deep archetypal anxieties awakening in the collective unconscious. Jung believed that such crises offer an opening for collective transformation. Fear, in these moments, forces individuals and societies to confront their shadows, what they have ignored or denied. The path forward, according to Jung, is not avoidance, but integration. And integration involves three fundamental steps. First, recognition, acknowledging fear as a legitimate and natural part of the human experience. Second, exploration, investigating the roots of the fear, both personal and archetypal, asking what the fear is trying to teach or reveal. Third, transformation, using fear as a catalyst for growth. This might involve confronting challenges, shifting behaviors, or adopting new perspectives. A powerful metaphor for this process is found in the hero's journey, a pattern not only described by Jung, but expanded upon by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. At the heart of this journey lies the confrontation with fear, the symbolic dragon. In facing the dragon, the hero doesn't just overcome a threat. He or she uncovers new dimensions of selfhood. This journey represents the process of individuation, integrating the dark, transcending internal limitations, and emerging wiser and more complete. And yet, despite the power of fear to guide us, most people avoid it. That's because facing fear often brings discomfort. even pain. But within that discomfort lies transformation, and beyond the dragon, the treasure. Jung pointed out that our resistance to personal growth often doesn't present itself in loud or obvious ways. Instead, it frequently hides in plain sight, disguised as denial, procrastination, or a compulsive search for quick fixes that do nothing but cover up the deeper problem. These surface-level behaviors, according to Jung, are not random or meaningless. They are, in fact, manifestations of what he called the shadow, those unconscious parts of ourselves that we ignore, suppress, or outright reject. He believed this resistance to change was deeply symbolic. It reflected a profound inner reluctance to leave behind the familiar, even if that familiarity is riddled with dissatisfaction or emotional stagnation. Take, for instance, the fear of changing careers. So many people remain stuck in jobs that drain them, that bring no joy or purpose. On the surface, it might look like laziness or indecision, but Jung would argue otherwise. He would say that this fear represents an inner doorway, an opportunity to explore what truly matters to the individual. It's not just fear, it's the first challenge on the path of transformation. The resistance in these situations is not a dead end, but rather the beginning of something new, something potentially life-changing. Although archetypes are universal patterns that live within the collective unconscious, the way they manifest is deeply personal. Each individual experiences these symbolic energies in their own way. Therefore, it becomes crucial to understand how fear shows up in your daily life. Jung encouraged self-inquiry as a way to bring unconscious patterns into awareness. He might have posed questions like, what do I consistently avoid? Which situations make me anxious or uncomfortable? What behavioral patterns do I repeat that seem rooted in fear? Are there any recurring themes in my dreams that provoke fear or unease? Such reflective questions are more than just psychological exercises. They are keys that can unlock hidden doors within the psyche. When we begin to explore fear through the lens of the unconscious and the archetypal, we come to see that fear is not merely a nuisance or a weakness. Instead, it becomes a sacred portal, one that can lead us to profound inner change. Jung reminded us that when fear is approached with both courage and curiosity, it has the potential to become one of our greatest teachers. We've now reached what may seem like the end of this journey, but as Jung so eloquently expressed, every ending is also the beginning of something else. The intention here is not to banish fear from your life, but to evolve your relationship with it. Rather than viewing it as the enemy, we can begin to see fear as an unexpected ally. This, according to Jung, was the true essence of transformation. Recognizing fear not as a roadblock to growth, but as a bridge to a more integrated, authentic version of ourselves. When we consciously examine our fears, we realize they are much more than inconvenient emotional states. They are signals, pointing us toward areas in our lives that demand greater attention and care. For example, consider the fear of loneliness. On the surface, it might feel like something to escape, but if we look more deeply, it can reveal a yearning for deeper connection, not just with others, but with ourselves. Or take the fear of failure, which so many of us carry. This often indicates that we've linked our self-worth too closely with external achievements rather than with our intrinsic value. Jung saw fear as a messenger from the unconscious. It tends to arise precisely when something within us is yearning to be acknowledged, integrated, and understood. Fear doesn't show up arbitrarily. It appears when we're at a crossroads, when we're ready, though not always willing, to step beyond the known into new territory. Each time you feel afraid, it is an invitation to ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What is this fear trying to teach me? The path of individuation, the journey to becoming who you truly are, requires the integration of all aspects of the psyche, especially those parts we usually reject or fear. Fear, in this context, becomes a compass. It doesn't mislead. It points us toward the very parts of ourselves that are still waiting to be explored, accepted, and embraced. And when you begin to treat fear not as a threat, but as a guide, the journey to wholeness becomes far clearer. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a major life decision, moving to a new city, starting a new relationship, or leaving behind an old identity. Fear inevitably arises. It whispers warnings, urging you to stay in your comfort zone. But if you look more closely, you'll see that fear is guarding something valuable, something your soul knows you need to encounter. Throughout this reflection, we've returned again and again to a single idea. Fear is not something to be quickly overcome or brushed aside. It deserves your attention. It must be accepted, examined, and understood. Jung famously said, "What you resist persists." And indeed, when we resist fear, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It grows stronger and often re-emerges in unexpected ways: anxiety, self-sabotaging behaviors, or even inner conflict. But when we face it directly and trace it to its roots, its power over us begins to dissolve. Freedom, in this psychological and spiritual context, does not mean the absence of fear. Rather, it means the conscious choice to move forward even with fear present. It means having the courage to step into the unknown while acknowledging that fear is walking beside you, not as your captor, but as your companion. To close this exploration, here are some Jung-inspired practices that can help you build a new relationship with fear, one rooted in understanding and transformation. First, initiate a dialogue with your fear. When you feel afraid, don't run from it. Sit with it. Ask, what am I truly afraid of? Write down your answers. Don't rush. Let your curiosity guide you. Next, explore shadow integration. Ask yourself, what parts of me have I been avoiding? Which aspects of myself do I dislike, hide, or deny? Fear often emerges from these shadow aspects, pieces of ourselves we've deemed unworthy or dangerous. But these parts are not your enemies. They are wounded messengers. Work on accepting them. Give them a seat at the table. You can also use your dreams as a guide. Jung believed that dreams are direct messages from the unconscious. If you dream about frightening or uncomfortable scenarios, don't ignore them. Analyze them. What symbols appear? What emotions arise? Your dreams may contain crucial clues about what you're neglecting in your waking life. Finally, connect with your archetypes. Reflect on which archetypal energies are active in your life. Are you in the role of the hero, setting off on a quest? Are you encountering the shadow, facing the unknown? Or perhaps the wise old man or woman is whispering guidance. These inner figures aren't just myths. They are mirrors, helping you understand how to walk through fear with purpose. And perhaps the most powerful practice of all, walk toward discomfort. When fear tells you to retreat, challenge yourself to take even the smallest step forward. This doesn't mean plunging into chaos. It means daring to approach what lies on the other side of your resistance. Remember, fear is not just an emotion to be managed. It is a message to be decoded. It reflects the landscape of your inner world, and it calls you toward integration, wholeness, and self-actualization. Jung's vision of fear is revolutionary because it invites us to move from victimhood to empowerment. Instead of seeing fear as something that holds us back, we can begin to see it as something that propels us forward. Above all, remember, fear is universal, but the way you choose to face it defines the quality of your life's journey. Jung left us a map, but no two paths are alike. You will never truly transcend fear unless you first understand that it is not your enemy. It is the messenger. It is the guardian of the cave where your greatest treasure lies. Carl Jung showed us that fear isn't something we need to run from, but something we must embrace as a vital part of the soul's journey toward individuation. So the next time fear rises, don't turn away. Greet it with curiosity and courage. Ask it what it's trying to show you. And in doing so, you won't just transform your fear, you'll transform yourself. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who might need it. There's so much more to explore in the depths of the psyche, and our upcoming videos will take you even further on this transformative journey. Stay curious, stay courageous, and we'll see you in the next one.